I did crisis management in sport, and the reason why I chose that topic is simple. Without the ability to handle situations that do come up or could come up, there would be no sport. And one of the reasons why I think sport is so appealing to so many people is it's simple. It's at its foundation, there's a set of rules, and you follow those rules, and the winner and the loser is determined naturally. And there's not many other aspects of life that follow that guideline, and that's why it appeals to so many people. Now, Webster defines a crisis as a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. Now, that is extremely vague by itself, but it's even more vague when you apply it to sport. I mean, something like a tweet can cause a crisis for an organization because their image is so fragile. One thing that's up, it's very much brought up in the news lately is abuse scandals, and this not just domestic abuse, which is very much common nowadays. With either whether it be coaches or we looked at it into it with Friday Night Tykes. You even throw that in there, but or it be or even a player going out and driving under the influence or getting arrested for anything. I mean, the organization doesn't have much control over an individual's actions, but what they do have control over is how they respond to these, and that's what fans see. So the first step is to stop the bleeding. Whenever an accusation comes out, you immediately hear the player suspended. Quick action is necessary because without quick action, fans and players alike start to question: did they know about this? Did were they trying to sweep it under the rug? Were they okay with it? And those questions are worse than any situation in itself. We might remember when Mike Rice Jr., the head coach of Rutgers, a few years back, a video came out of him verbally and physically abusing his players. That instantly uh, drawed heat, and Rutgers handled it properly. They suspended him, and they opened up an investigation, and they made that clear from the start that that was not tolerated. That erased a lot of questions that was Rutgers in on this? No, they distanced themselves. Now they might have known about it. We never know if what goes on behind the scenes. But if a organization, I mean, this could be an employee at a YMCA, if they do something bad, the YMCA has to be on top of it. And anything like this, it goes from all levels of athletics. You, as long as you're on top of it, the image stays put. It's the questions can be worse than the action itself. Another issue is violence and fan violence, and even athlete, participant violence. There was a shooting at an esports competition in 2017 in Jacksonville. Two people died, and the head of security was quoted saying it was only a matter of time. Now that doesn't, that would be horrible. Put yourselves in the shoes of the victims. That's an unacceptable answer. Another example, riots happen all the time in sports. We saw it with the hooligans. They were throwing firecrackers and chairs onto the field. 2000 saw Los Angeles riot after the Lakers won. 1984 saw Detroit riot after the Tigers won the World Series. And these are after wins. Imagine after a loss. So just simply knowing about a bad situation or knowing that something could happen is not sufficient. Another thing, natural disasters and even man-made disasters. San Francisco had an earthquake in the middle of the World Series in 1989. The rest of the games had to be moved to Oakland instead of San Francisco, and San Francisco lost. 1991 saw Montreal, in the middle of a baseball game, back when the Expos were still a team, part of the ceiling collapsed onto the walkway. That could have been a lot worse. There could have been a lot of injuries for that, and the Expos had to play the rest of the home games for the road for the season on the road. Why was that? That's because they weren't prepared. They just once it happened, they had to deal with it. There's a collective, it won't happen to me until it does attitude in sports, and that needs to change. There need to be more on top of things, even if it's something out of their control, like a natural disaster. You're on top of it, and it's all about how you're prepared for it. Social media and the changing sports landscape is another huge one. I mean, we saw this in earlier chapters in the textbook. The landscape that social media is creating. Players and fans have so much more connection to each other than they used to. They can be intertwined. I mean, any fan can message someone and an athlete, and they might not read it, but their opinions can go out. Fans and athletes are affected by this. I mean, Sam Decker, forward for the Wisconsin Badgers, had a bad night shooting in the national title game. He logged into social media and had death threats, so he went into a state of depression. Same thing happened with Blake O'Neal, the punter who fumbled against Michigan State. He didn't want to go outside for months. He said, and then even something like a picture. I mean, we saw with Michael Phelps. He was at the height of his popularity. Picture of him goes out of him hitting a bong, and he loses a lot of sponsorships. Athletes have to be aware of this, and teams have to be aware of this because image is everything in sports. And sport organizations are fragile. Every fan has their own opinion, and every fan's opinion represents money, therefore, the future of the organization. Other businesses don't have to deal with this. If you don't like a brand of shoes, you go buy another brand of shoes. There's there's less competition. But in sports, these organizations need their fans. They can't just whatever. There's plenty of people that buy shoes. No, each team has their own fan base, and they have to keep that image alive. Not only for the fans, but for the general public, because if they fall out of favor, if they don't respond quick enough to a player being accused of domestic violence, if they don't handle even something that's out of their control, no one's going to say an earthquake is a team's fault, but how they handled it definitely is a team's fault, and exactly how they handled it will be under scrutiny. You know, the more technology advances, the more problems there's going to be. And I do think we are a lot better than we used to be, in sports and outside of sports in handling crisis like this. Sport organizations are more in tune now with what needs to be done, but they also need to keep making progress because problems are just going to keep happening. You know, fans will always be violent. Natural disasters are always a threat. Uh, Anything can come up. All their players, each one of them can make their own decisions that really influence the direction of the franchise moving forward, and how the general public and the fans view how they handle these crises, no matter how big or small, will directly impact the organization moving forward.